Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called Dredd. So, this movie is not a sequel to the original Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd film. It's not the same thing. It goes into a quite different approach. It's not the same Dredd. It's not the same Judge. We have this story going in a very much more darker territory where a bulk of this movie has drug use in it, and reasonably there is a lot of just gruesome, gory killings that happen upon this movie. If anything, I can appreciate this film at some points and time for it trying to be artsy. I say artsy because we have several scenes in this movie that are, of course, slowed down and try to very much amplify certain visuals, and there's a lot of interesting things going on with camera work in this movie, but the whole entire reason because of that was really just, well, this movie has stuff to deal with drugs and so on and so forth. It is kind of interesting watching this film just because I like the way of which that it ends. I like the way of which this story heads. I just think that this movie overall is just kind of really fascinating, even though reasonably it's not exactly like it's a really cool action flick, and there probably isn't much beyond that. But sadly enough, this feels like a movie where I want to know more about this environment. I want to be more familiar with the Judge Dredd story, and I cannot quite get there because I wish that this would have been a show. I would have been happy with this being a TV show rather than a movie. I honestly think Judge Dredd or Dredd should honestly be a show at this point. I understand that Dredd is honestly done in a distant future, so that would probably be very hard to come by. But I think Dredd is way better off to be done as a show rather than just a movie. I just think that people would be clamoring to be more familiar with Dredd or be more familiar with the content, the environment, and we could have had Dredd do numerous crimes leading us up to Peachtree, and it would just be cool to see Dredd just do common crime. He doesn't actually have to do like a big, huge event like thing, which eventually, towards the end of this movie, that's where we get into, is to have Dredd do a smaller crime and head his way onto the more complicated, fairly complex crime that is to be having Dredd try to go up against. So, going on into this movie, I would say that there probably is some give and take of this film. Because some people might say, well, this movie is it's not quite, it doesn't ever quite get there. It doesn't quite ever get there. It kind of rushes through a lot, and you can't savor this environment and the amount of time of which they do it. A lot of things, even with there being this slow mo like thing, I felt that also this movie feels very rushed at some points. To me, I'm like, man, you you need to do this in a show. You can't do this in a movie. You can't help us. You can't invest in the characters good enough. It's yeah, you have to invest in Dredd just because you've seen a previous movie of him, but and you can invest in the fact that just really Carl Urban in this movie is a freaking amazing. God, I love Carl Urban and anything that he does. That's why I desperately wanted Carl Urban to play Wolverine because I was thinking, man, Carl Urban would be an amazing Wolverine. He would play that role perfectly. But it is what it is. We also have Carl Urban doing The Boys right now, and we'll see where that goes. So, yeah. So, interesting enough, we have Dredd's partner, or brand new partner in here. And immediately I would ask, well, what happened to Dredd's former partner? Shouldn't they have done a lead up to that? Shouldn't they have had it to where Dredd is kind of known for consistently having his partners die or something? They could have done some kind of story to help us understand why Dredd is just getting a new recruit. I don't know, maybe Dredd is just the guy that has to be the person that has to usher every single new cadet in. Maybe that's just Dredd's deal. Is Dredd is just the pass or fail kind of guy. And so we have Anderson, who we find out seemingly has a power of sorts, a brain power to either read people's minds, manipulate people's minds, F up their minds, and she has some kind of mind power. So I think the best scene is when Anderson is going along with Dredd, because I probably will forget this when we actually start reviewing this movie and talk about it. There's one part where Dredd says, hey, don't, where's your helmet? And so Anderson says, well, my helmet will conflict with my abilities, sir. And Dredd says, well, I think a bullet will affect your abilities a lot more when it goes through your head, kind of thing. And it's like, that was actually really intelligent. That was a really intelligent thing to say. But when looking at it also, I think it is kind of interesting how every single judge has a helmet on but Anderson, because power, but still. So we have to where Dredd goes in and again, maybe Anderson might have a psychic ability or something like that. But anyways, we have Dredd going into peach trees and pretty much taking on the worst of the worst villain, which is a girl named Mama in the Mama clan. But we also really get to set up every single other kind of gang that is to be involved in this world, which I'm like, yeah, we don't quite get enough. We don't get enough of, there was one gang called the Judged, and I was like, man, if we could have like those characters going and creating a ruckus or something like that, I would be like, yeah, I'm like, these guys look so cool. Their face is tattooed just like how the judges' helmets are. And I was like, man, if we could get these gangs to be involved in here, like every single gang, somehow one or the other getting involved, like we're having Mama giving a ton of money out to whoever can kill Dredd and all these gangs get involved, that would be an interesting story. Like if it was like the movie Warriors, if you guys remember the original movie Warriors, where the guy's like, "Can you dig it?" and they're like, "Yeah," and then the gang member who brought every other gang together in unison ends up getting killed, and then that's when you get the Warriors come and play, yay, with the clinking of the bottles. That Warriors movie, not the Tom Hardy movie. I know there's a ton of movies called Warrior or Warriors or whatever, but the Warriors, I think, is what it's originally called. But anyways, moving on. So it should have been an all-out gang brawl, but instead they kind of take this environment and they use the F out of it, creating so much destruction, so on and so forth. It's amazing how much that they took one seemingly environment and used the crap out of it. I don't know if a lot of this environment was CG'd or was they actually built this building or this kind of stretching of this elongated like building. I don't know what exactly they did, how exactly they cut this, and so on and so forth. So I thought that this movie was really interesting, but I felt that I didn't get nearly enough of what this environment was giving me. So I hope someday that they end up doing a Dredd show that is just like this, but we get more familiar with the environment. We get more familiar with this whatever this is. And I think that would probably increase comic book sales if Dredd is still being a thing that is still a comic book, because from what I'm aware of, Dredd still Judge Dredd or Dredd is still I think it is spurning out quite possibly yet another Judge Dredd movie from what I've heard called something Crossing Edge or Curving Edge or something like that. There might be a third Judge Dredd movie in the works, and people might have to figure out and scout it out wherever the heck that this is. But it'll be interesting to see a quite possible another Judge Dredd film. I think that film might go to a vastly different direction, but than this original source material. But I'd be kind of interested to see where exactly this story goes and whatever, what have you. So let's go on to spoilers. I would say, for people that do not know about this movie, I would say this movie's not for everyone, but for those of you who love an action movie, this delivers that for the most point in spades. You get quite a bit of times where you're really rooting for Dredd, and that is the best thing about the movie. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So it's a really simple film. So we have Dredd in the very beginning of this movie in his futuristic like motorcycle going and chasing down some van of some guys who have seemingly slow-mo, which is the drug that kind of is an inhaler, and this inhaler tends to slow down time because this drug has it to where your brain is slowed down, but everything is going on in actual real time. It's not like anybody has an ability to now slow down time. So we have it to where this van is crazily driving all over the place out of control to where eventually they completely and utterly run over some guy. And so we end up having Dredd saying, well, hey, they just killed an innocent, so like I'm gonna go and murder these guys. Because the interesting thing about Judge Dredd is this guy can actually be judge, jury, and executioner, and I thought that that was really interesting. Instead of actually having these characters being processed and whatever, we have it to where this judge instead can just go like, well, you murdered 3 people, so I'm going to kill you. Like, I'm going to shoot you and you're going to die, and that's going to be your judgment. I thought that that was really interesting, and I liked that. I really enjoyed it. So we have Dredd eventually on foot chasing these guys down, and we eventually have it to where Dredd, one by one, starts to kill each one of them, and eventually he gets to one guy that is to hold up a girl hostage. And so we have, of course, the criminal talking smack, and so we have Dredd mentioning, well, whatever you say, hotshot. And so we end up having Dredd repeat that line yet again. And he's like, I said hot shot, which triggers his gun because this is the most interesting thing about these judges' weapons is you have it to where these weapons have it to where there's an arsenal seemingly of different kind of things that a judge can use, like different kinds of bullets and different kinds of things that they can do with this weapon, like a signal flare, or in this case a hot shot, which is kind of like a flare but it's like a bullet flare. So we have Dredd who shoots this guy in the head, and this flare thing goes through this guy's mouth, and you can just see this guy basically lighting up like a pumpkin, burning alive inside, and he falls down dead. So we have Dredd calling it in, saying, yep, we have some murderers here, and so call for cleanup. So we have Dredd going to his office to talk to his chief judge to get his new candidate, his new partner temporarily Anderson. So we have to where Judge Dredd and Chief Judge are going into an interrogation room, and in the other room we end up having Anderson. So we have to where Chief Judge mentions how Anderson had kind of just barely not quite passed her exam, and Judge says, well, there is no barely anything. It's either pass or fail, and she failed. So we end up having Judge Dredd, or Chief Dredd, or Chief Judge saying, well, yeah, that's great and all, but there's something special about this girl. So she goes onto a mic to say, hey, Anderson, tell me something about the people that are in this room watching you. So we have Anderson explaining every little bit of information of people that are in her room examining, or across the room examining her, psychically saying about Dredd, psychically saying about her chief judge, so on and so forth. So we have it to where Dredd isn't really impressed, but he's just like, okay, sure. Like, we'll see how good she'll be. So we have it to where Dredd tells Anderson, as they're walking out to go along on to their duty, we have it to where Dredd mentions all the rules that she is to follow. Hey, hold on to your weapon or you'll fail. Uh, if you judge incorrectly, you fail. So on and so forth. Dredd is basically stacking and compiling every single possible failing scenario for Anderson to help her understand what Judge is going to do with her. So we have it to where Dredd is having Anderson make all the calls, all the judgments, so on and so forth. And so we have it to where Judge says, okay, Anderson, where are we going to go? And Anderson says, okay, we'll take peach trees. So they head on their way to peach trees. Because we find out that there are 3 men who ended up getting skinned alive and tossed from top of the building all the way crashing down to the very bottom of said building. And so this was to make an example of anyone who is to F with the Mama clan. And so we have it to where Dredd makes his way to inspect these bodies, and there is a medic there that seems to be within this facility that examines these people and is telling them what is to go on, and is to basically say, hey, yeah, like, the Mama clan is here, and like, these are the people you're dealing with, as well as this medic telling us about every single clan that this world has. So we have it to where Anderson and Dredd make their way seemingly up to try and get to Mama, and slowly but surely we are having Dredd eventually going and starting to take down some of these thugs, but eventually they end up taking one of these thugs to get information. And so while they are to eventually get information, Mama goes and she has some tech person that is going out of his way to completely 100% control this building, to close the entire building off so no one can get in or out. Also, she goes on the loudspeaker of this building to tell every single person in this hotel or apartment complex, hey, I want Dredd dead, so you all need to come up with some way to make him dead for me. So we end up having like kids coming out of their apartment buildings with guns in hand to quite possibly go and take down Dredd. And like all craziness kind of ensues at this point. But we have it seemingly where Dredd takes this guy named K and Anderson is starting to try to get information from this K guy. It seems that K tries to play mind games with him, and K plays mind games back, trying to think of the worst possible thing to freak Anderson the F out. But reasonably, Anderson Anderson goes and beats Kay with mind games because she has a power where Kay is just Anderson can play more mind games than this guy can. And so eventually Anderson gets the information she needs and Kay is left peeing his pants. So interesting enough. So we have it to where the further along that we go in here, we have Kay consistently following both Dredd and Anderson. We have it to where at some point Dredd here's how eventually we get to Kay. Dredd eventually goes and puts a bomb into one of these doors and then starts firing away upon this room, and that is to take out seemingly some of Mama's guys, which starts to trigger their awareness of Dredd and Anderson being here. And so that eventually entails both Dredd and Anderson eventually collecting Kay. And so once the threat of, hey guys, everyone go and kill Dredd because I want him dead. I want both of these cops dead. So we end up having Dredd and Anderson trying to make their way to try to find any of these rooms or apartments that they can hide out for a while to try to keep making their way through this building. And while they are to make their way, they are eventually going to really have one entire floor that has these massive amount of guns, big, gigantic weapons of sorts that are to go and to fire upon both Dredd and Anderson. And it is just an onslaught of just craziness going on. We end up having Dredd trying to make his way through this whole onslaught of just this hammering of bullets. Again, Anderson, Dredd dodging their way. So eventually we end up having it to where Anderson eventually ends up getting taken by the Mama clan, and Dredd is making his way back into getting to the Mama clan. And so we have it to where Mama is realizing that their gang is not really quite all that qualified to be able to handle Dredd, and so she ends up calling the police. So we end up finding out that there are judges that are more than willing to take a pay to go and kill their own kind. There are dirty cops out there, so we find 4 judges coming in to try and kill 2. So we have 4 judges coming in, and so the leader judge goes into Mama and say, hey, how much are you willing to pay for us to kill Dredd? And she says, well, $1 million split 4 ways. So we have the lead judge telling this group to go and kill Anderson And of course, we have it to where Anderson uses her power to go and not only kill Kay, but eventually she combats her way. She loses her gun because Kay ends up firing Anderson's gun, and it ends up backfiring and exploding into Kay's hand. And so we end up having Anderson making her way with having to steal one of these thugs' guns to make her way back to Dredd. So we eventually have Anderson breaking free. Mama finds that out, and so the female judge ends up going after Anderson and saying, well, Anderson is probably going to be taken off guard by me, and her defenses are going to go down, and I'm going to shoot her in the head, which doesn't happen. This judge ends up finding Anderson, and Anderson ends up going, oh, hey, you're here. And the female judge says, yeah, I'm here to help you. I'm here as backup. And so Anderson reads her mind and is like, no, you're not. Pow! And this female judge ends up getting killed. So we have it to where the Dredd is in somewhere of a boiler room. And so we have these judges making their way to Dredd. The first judge, we have some really interesting combat things going on between these two Dredds, or between these two judges, and I thought that this combat was really interesting. It's very violent, very gruesome, and you could almost see that it feels very real. I thought it was a really interesting fight out. So, and there was a lot of times where I was like, man, this is also very confusing as well. But eventually, of course, we have Dredd who just outpowers this other detective. And so we end up having two other Dredds, I keep getting Dredd and Judge confused. We have two other judges that make their way to Dredd. And so we end up having Dredd asking these two judges, hey, how much was I worth? And so this judge goes, well, 3 million split 4 ways. And Dredd says, well, it's 3 ways now because I killed one of you. So one of the judges with this big gun comes around to try to get Dredd, while the other judge is talking to him to just kind of see where exactly he's at, and to kind of keep tabs of where Dredd is, but to kind of just keep talking to him so he can maybe be distracted. So this judge ends up coming around and starts firing away, and eventually Dredd ends up getting lucky to start firing and eventually goes and kills this one Dredd, or this one judge, I mean. So we have Dredd versus Judge, and so we have it to where we find Dredd starting to lose ammo. He has basically no bullets left. So he is calling out any number of things. He's calling for any kind of rapid fire or whatever, high X kind of thing. And eventually high X is a thing that works. And so we end up having this one judge just kind of like, you know what? I'm not sweating you now. It seems like you're basically completely losing all of your ammo. So I'm just gonna have fun with this. I'm gonna just go and kill you. So we have Dredd basically losing every single bullet. So Dredd ends up just hiding behind a wall. We have this judge call out armor piercing, and so this judge fires through this wall, and takes Judge down, or takes Dredd down. And so this judge circles around this wall, and Dredd says, wait. And so this judge says, wait? Really? Wait for what? Wait for you to have 1 or 2 more minutes of life? Wait for me to change my mind? Why would I wait for you? And so Dredd is like, well, wait because she's gonna kill you. And Anderson comes from behind and shoots up this judge, and he falls over. And so now Dredd now can steal the ammo from this judge to now go and face Mama. So we have it to where Dredd and Anderson make their way through all of these Mama people, taking them out one by one in a blaze of glory, so on and so forth, leading us to eventually have it to where Mama is the only one eventually left. Kind of really trying to rush through this as much as humanly possible, because I think the best part is Dredd versus all these judges. That is the most interesting thing of this entire movie. Everything else in between that is just it's just kind of like it's just kind of there. Like, the best part is these dirty judges going against Dredd, I think, is the best part of this entire movie. But anyways, and eventually we have these judges eventually killing the medic that is in this building, because the medic was going to be a witness to what had all gone down, so the judges had to kill him. So we have to where we find Mama that seems to have some kind of device attached to her arm saying, hey, if I flatline, this building is going to explode. And we have it to where Dredd is like, well, how exactly is that going to work? And so we have it to where Dredd goes and shoots Mama in the belly, and then grabs her, takes her, and chucks her out a window, puts slow-mo in her, and chucks her out this window to have her falling from top of the building to all the way down to the ground, and the building does not explode. So I was like, wait a minute, so did the device just not work? Was the device a lie to get Mama to be able to get out of here scot-free? I don't know, but when looking at it, Mama is dead, the good guys win, and we have it to where Anderson is going to Dredd and saying, well, I guess I'm going to fail, right? Because I lost my weapon. And Dredd goes, you know what? I think you did just fine under the circumstances. So, like, you passed. And so I thought that was kind of rather interesting, how towards the tail end of it, we had it to where Anderson probably did do some wrong things, but under this really rigorous circumstance of things to happen, Anderson did the best she could under these horrifying circumstances. Plus, on top of that, Anderson came back to protect her partner from almost certain death, because eventually Dredd goes and has this med kit that he has with his jacket of sorts, and sews up and cleans up and takes and covers all of his wounds, which I thought were interesting, to have them do this kind of like quick meta, like this quick uh, showcasing of Dredd, like addressing his wounds, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, a very interesting movie, but I think that's all I wanted to say about this. I could have probably really rushed through this review a lot more because really at some points I could say that this movie is fairly simple. It's simple, but I like the action part of it. I like where this movie escalates, and I think it's a better approach than like story wise. I think it's a little bit better of approach than the original Stallone movie because I think the original Stallone Dredd movie is very like the story is just very odd. There's a lot of interesting visuals going in that movie. Rob Schneider is really fun in that film, but I just think that that story is just so bizarre. We find out that in the original Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd that bizarrely Judge Dredd was like cloned and all kinds of stuff that he didn't actually have the parents that he thought he did and all kinds of bizarre things. So having that story getting way more complicated than it actually needed to, I actually liked this movie for its simplicity because it was simple, action packed, affected or effective in wanting you to say, hey, I want to know more about this environment. I want to know more about these people, and I hope that eventually there is some kind of Dredd series, like some kind of show that is going to spawn out of this. I think that you can do a Judge Dredd show and people would really be interested in it. But we'll see what ends up happening with this. You could go into any number of uh, Netflix, whichever, whoever owns the rights eventually to this, and make a show. I think it would be way better off doing a show than a movie. You really need to invest in these characters, and I would really love to eventually see the overall growth of a Judge Dredd through an entire season of a show where you're having him do a lot of times just common crime, but eventually it'll escalate into these bigger crime things. And it just feels like it's a lot to put into one movie, and there's some stuff in here that I feel that they were trying to set this up for a franchise and it just didn't exactly pan out, or it was like, well, let's kind of see if people are still interested in this. So I don't know. I really enjoyed what this movie was, so I'm going to enjoy myself and get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.